Hello, you've reached S.J. Thomason with Christian-Apologist.com. Today I'm going to offer you a video rebuttal of Sam Harris's book, The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Explain Human Values. Sam Harris, who is a best-selling author, outspoken atheist, and neuroscientist, is considered one of the four horses of New Atheism, with Daniel Dennett, Richard Dawkins, and the late Christopher Hitchens. Yet his views contrast the views of other New Atheists because he endorses objective morality instead of relative morality. Atheists who endorse relative morality do so in recognition of the source of objective morality, which is God. Harris's 2010 book, which is entitled, again, The Moral Landscape, How Science Can Explain Human Values, is his ambitious attempt to explain his perspectives on humanity's objective moral standard without God. The intention of the present video is to offer a critique. What is the best explanation for our objective morality? William Lane Craig references William Sorley, who was a professor of moral philosophy at Cambridge University, and his book Moral Values and the Idea of God, to explain that the best hope for a rational, unified view of reality is to postulate God as both the ground of the natural and moral orders. In Sorley's view, both the natural order and the moral order are part of reality. The question then is, what worldview can combine these two orders into the most coherent explanatory form? Sorley argued that the best explanation is an infinite, eternal mind who is the architect of nature and whose moral purpose man and the universe are gradually fulfilling. What is our purpose? Christians believe that humanity has a spiritual purpose, which is to fulfill our calling from God by capitalizing on our spiritual gifts, growing our character, and emulating the example of Jesus Christ. Atheists propose alternatives. Harris states, I will argue, however, that questions about values, about meaning, morality, and life's larger purpose are really questions about the well-being of creatures. Yet he never specifically defines the well-being construct he states that we need to maximize. He says, well-being resists precise definition, yet is indispensable. Well-being, according to Harris, is whatever leads to happiness and pleasure. Harris adopts consequentialism and notes, the rightness of an act depends on how it impacts the well-being of conscious creatures. On his website, reasonablefaith.org, William Lane Craig offers his critique of Harris's circular reasoning. He says, so to ask, why is maximizing creatures' well-being good is, on his definition, the same as asking, why does maximizing creatures' well-being maximize creatures' well-being? It is simply a tautology, talking in a circle. Thus, Harris has solved his problem simply by redefining his terms. It is mere wordplay. At the end of the day, Harris is not really talking about moral values. He is just talking about what's conducive to the flourishing of sentient life on this planet. So what is conducive with the flourishing of life on this planet? Harris contrasts a bad life, which he typifies with the story of an African woman whose son murders her daughter after he is kidnapped by a murderous gang, with a good life, which he typifies as one who is in a romantic, wonderful relationship and has a job that is intellectually stimulating and financially rewarding and lives in a peaceful environment. He points to Christianity to note an interesting dichotomy. The religious person, having a bad life, may be happy, knowing the meek shall inherit the world in the afterlife, while the religious person having a good life may be bothered by the way Jesus Christ said that it would be easier to squeeze a camel through a needle than for a wealthy person to go to heaven. Jesus also promised that some of the last will be first and some of the first will be last. Both points demonstrate that happiness in this life may adversely relate to happiness in the afterlife. Perhaps it is for this reason that Harris considers himself an atheist. Yet with God, nothing is impossible. We have numerous examples of the reformed and the wealthy and prosperous. These include King David, Saul, Paul, Abraham, Joseph, King Solomon. They earned God's favor in the Bible. The parable of the talents states that we should use our spiritual gifts wisely. To whom much has been given, much is expected. How are well-being and morality linked, you ask? Harris states, so it is with the linkage between morality and well-being. To say that morality is arbitrary or culturally constructed or merely personal, because we must first assume that the well-being of conscious creatures is good, is like saying that science is arbitrary or culturally constructed or merely personal, because we must first assume that a rational understanding of the universe is good. Morality can better be explained by philosophy than by science. Morality speaks to the principles concerning the distinction between right and wrong and good or bad behavior. Science is the study of the structure and behavior of the physical and natural world through experiment and observation. Accordingly, developing a, quote, rational understanding of the universe does not equate to stating that humanity universally seeks to maximize its well-being to achieve happiness and pleasure. The comparison does nothing to address the problem Harris faces, which is to explain why maximizing the well-being of individuals and populations through happiness and pleasure both is and ought to be our universal goal. Is Harris's theory generalizable, you wonder? Do all populations and people maximize their well-being through happiness and pleasure? No. The Schwartz Value Surveys, which are well-known surveys of individual level and societal level values across cultures, indicate that humans vary in notable ways. Some, particularly Western societies, seek self-enhancement, which is consistent with Harris's somewhat hedonistic philosophy, which likely evolved from Epicureanism. Others, particularly Eastern societies, value the self-transcendence of selfish values, preferring benevolence and universalism. Accordingly, Harris's philosophy cannot be applied across cultures because all don't seek self-enhancement as he does in his pursuit of happiness and pleasure. Furthermore, happiness and pleasure are consequences of our values, not justifications for same. At this individual level, what maximizes the pleasure and happiness of one person may concurrently maximize the displeasure and sadness of another. Harris demonstrates with an example of a psychopath who derives pleasure by raping his 9-year-old stepson. Such an example demonstrates that the maximization of well-being can have both positive and negative effects on people and societies. Clearly, this ought not to be our universal goal. In what situation would well-being fail humanity, you wonder? Harris adds, what if the laws of nature allow for different and seemingly antithetical peaks on the moral landscape? What if there is a possible world in which the golden rule has become an unshakable instinct, while there is another world of equivalent happiness where the inhabitants reflexively violate it? Perhaps this is a world of perfectly matched sadists and masochists. Let's assume that in this world, every person can be paired, one for one, with the saints in the first world, and while they are different in every other way, these pairs are identical in every way relevant to their well-being. Stipulating all these things, the consequentialist would be forced to say that these worlds are morally equivalent. Is this a problem? Harris doesn't think so. The problem lies in how many details we have been forced to ignore in the process of getting to this point. End quote. I submit that one of these important details, that Harris noted, is how humanity came to value goodness, kindness, benevolence, love, and empathy over their counterparts, as Plato pointed out in his book, The Republic, and Harris points out here. The possibility of a world of evil exists. So why are we not living in such a world? The answer is we have a moral lawgiver. Furthermore, Harris both acknowledges that the world of matched sadists and masochists is antithetical to the present world, yet by using this example, Harris demonstrates that he regards followers of the Golden Rule to be equally capable as sadists and masochists of reaching the heights of moral virtue. He uses the, quote, far-fetched scenario in which there is no connection between being good and feeling good. So rapists, liars, and thieves would experience the same depth of happiness as the saints. If evil turned out to be as reliable a path to happiness as goodness is, saints and sinners would occupy equivalent peaks on the moral landscape. In essence, he is stating that if evil results in happiness just as well as good does, then being evil is morally equivalent to being good. Defining a good world as one in which people seek to maximize their well-being, and an evil world one in which sadists and masochists thrive, fails to acknowledge the reality in the world in which we all live. In our world, people do both good and evil. Some do more good than evil, while others do more evil than good. Yet we all have a moral compass in which we can distinguish good from evil. And the sane among Earth's inhabitants recognize and appreciate the objective moral values, such as truth, justice, and equality. These values stand regardless of our opinions on them, and regardless of whether individuals or society seek to maximize their well-being to gain happiness and pleasure. His views call to mind dualism, which is embraced in pantheism and the philosophy of yin and yang, As C.S. Lewis states, if dualism is true, then the bad power must be a being who likes badness for its own sake. But in reality, we have no experience of anyone liking badness just because it is bad. The nearest we can get to it is cruelty. But in real life, people are cruel for one of two reasons. Either because they are sadists, that is because they have a sexual perversion, which makes cruelty a cause of sensual pleasure to them, or else for the sake of something they are going to get out of it, money, power, or safety. Wickedness, when you examine it, turns out to be the pursuit of some good in the wrong way. You can be good for the mere sake of goodness. You cannot be bad for the mere sake of badness. All the things which enable a bad man to be effectively bad are in themselves good things: resolution, cleverness, good looks, existence itself. This is why dualism, in a strict sense, will not work. Christianity agrees with dualism in that this universe is at war, but it does not think this is a war between independent powers, as the pantheists do. It thinks this is a civil war, a rebellion, and that we are living in a part of a universe occupied by the rebel. In conclusion, Harris's conceptions of objective morality based on the well-being of humanity are flawed in a number of important ways. First, he fails to cogently define well-being and instead suggests that it is whatever leads to happiness and pleasure. He further makes the assumption that all of humanity seeks to maximize happiness and pleasure, yet ignores primarily Eastern societies in which self-transcendence is highly valued as opposed to self-enhancement. Additionally, he acknowledges that both good and evil may correspond to the happiness and pleasure of various types of humans, psychopaths. So the maximization of well-being for some will be at the detriment of those they victimize. Clearly, this is not an optimal representation of the objective morality that we know to be true. He also presents what he calls far-fetched conception of an evil world of masochists and sadists to explain his philosophy without acknowledging why such a world does not exist. The reason why such a world does not exist is because we have a moral compass that gave us the innate desire for kindness, gratitude, humility, forgiveness, goodness, truth, equality, and justice. If we did not have an objective moral lawgiver, his conception of a far-fetched world would not be so far-fetched. Thank God he believes such a world is far-fetched, as that demonstrates God's work has been successful. Thank you so much for stopping by today. I hope you subscribe. We'll talk to you soon. Bye-bye.